So, welcome to the Great Falls International Airport Authority Board meeting for November 26, 2019. The mission of the Great Falls International Airport Authority is to optimize transportation services and development in our region. The vision of the Great Falls International Airport Authority is to maximize the airport's benefit to our region. Please remember, the board appreciates participation from the public. If you have comments throughout the board meeting or work session, please stand, state your name and address, and your comments will be heard. With the quorum of the board present, I call the meeting to order. I will roll call the board. Commissioner Lalonde. Present. Commissioner Tembo. Here. Commissioner Retz. Here. Commissioner Smith. Here. Commissioner Evans. Here. Commissioner Bakke. Here. Commissioner Hogan is here as well. All righty. Let us stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Alrighty, so we'll first on the agenda is the consent agenda. The consent agenda is made up of routine day-to-day items that require board action, but do not appear to have significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion/vote by any board member. Items this month are A, approval of board meeting minutes from October 2019. B, Financial Committee meeting minutes from November 19, 2019. C, payroll checks totaling $97,203.42. D, maintenance and operations checks numbered 24,996 to 25,058, totaling $448,576. E, approval passenger facility charge totaling $60,000. And F, financial reports for October 2019. Any items to be pulled, Commissioners? Any motions, Commissioners?
I move we accept the consent agenda as stated.
All right. Having a motion and a second, is there any discussion? All those in favor of approving the consent agenda say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The motion passes. Brings us to the director's report. John.
Great, thank you. Yeah, a lot of things to discuss this month. The first is the airline rendezvous. I've got just I'll pass around our logo for the rendezvous. You may recall a month or so ago we discussed the possibility of bringing all the airlines to Great Falls for the Montana Airline Rendezvous. This will be the third year of the event. In the last month we were successful in attracting it. We did get a good fight from Billings, but in the end it was decided that we would be the host for 2020, so we're really excited to be bringing this event to Great Falls. We'll be inviting all the North American carriers. This last year, I think about 9 carriers showed up. It's a speed dating event is what it's typically called, where we'll spend one morning with all of the airlines at a table, and the airports will rotate through the different airlines, giving us an opportunity to present our community statistically to those airlines. But in addition to that, that's the main reason for the conference, but in addition to it, we actually get a day and a half with the airlines just for us. And that's the real value of this opportunity, is to have these carriers come to Great Falls and see what our tourism pitch is. And so the way we attract these guys to the community, because the airlines will not pay a cent to send their route planners out to a community. First of all, we have to comp the conference, and Spring Hill Suites As you can see on there is our lead sponsor. They have agreed to provide 25 rooms for the airlines, which is really exciting. That was a major step forward in helping us secure this conference, to have that kind of leadership out front from Spring Hill Suites. And so very thankful for that. But then the other way we attract them is by the activities that we're able to offer them on Activity Day. The way this conference has evolved is on the Tuesday of the conference, we'll be taking the airlines out throughout the region to try some of the recreational assets that we have. Currently, what we're expecting to be able to offer is some fly fishing. We're working with a local contractor to provide some fly fishing tours. We'll be doing some mountain biking, some rock climbing, potentially some hiking, and maybe even some whitewater rafting and some kayaking. So we're going to have a lot of activities that they can do on that day, and they'll choose between those, and we'll have some community leaders taking them out during that event. We're still looking at how the agenda will stack up, but it looks like on Monday we'll be having something here in town to give them an opportunity to interact with some of our community leadership. There'll be a dinner, maybe an opportunity to see some of the area restaurants and bars. We might do sort of a taste of Great Falls, where we move from location to location with either the trolley or something like the trolley to give them a little bit of the city side of the community before we take them out on Tuesday and beat them up. But a really exciting opportunity to bring these airlines here, and really a great opportunity to bring the other airports here to our community. And so it's kind of an exciting year. 2020 is shaping up to be. We're going to have the airports, the Montana State Conference here in February. Tourism said that's an event bringing about 400 people to the region, and so all the airports will be here in February for the state conference. A lot of the consulting firms, I'm sure the FAA will come, maybe TSA leadership for the region. So we'll be hosting that in February, and then we'll be coming right back in September and having all the airlines here in the airports again. So we're really excited about this opportunity to showcase our community, and I think it comes at a critical time. We're about 80% on our incentive drive, put together some airline incentives for a SCASD grant next spring. That grant award should occur around the August-September timeframe, so ideally we'll be coming to this conference with our full incentive package, including a SCASD grant, which should double or even more our local match. So we should have a fully loaded incentive package and be able to sit down with the airlines and propose some new routes and have a decent chance of bringing those routes into realization. If the presentation that we've prepared for the community, as we've talked about, these incentives, shows that our traffic right now is at a historic high, minus the Allegiant traffic. Allegiant's still being challenged by that Canadian dollar situation, so they're about a third lower than they were at their peak back in 14-15. But other than that, all of the other, what we call the daily carriers, the guys that run scheduled service every day, are at an all-time high for Great Falls. So it's a really good timing of opportunity, and Montana certainly being a desirable destination for the airlines. We think this conference really couldn't come at a better time. So very excited to be bringing that in here next September. Other thing I'd mention is next Tuesday, December 3rd, at the 5:30 work session, we'll be presenting to the city a regular airport update. They've asked just for some general information on the airport and what initiatives we have underway and how things are going. And so we've prepared a fairly lengthy presentation. We have an hour. So we're going to endeavor to consume that hour, providing information on all the various things we're doing. I think there's a lot to talk about. We not only the airline business, but also our land development efforts, which are beginning to culminate, and some of the things we've realized on the master plan. Really, a lot of what we set out to do in that master plan now 5 years ago, we're putting into motion with the development down at the general aviation side of the field. We've successfully lengthened 17 and rehabilitated 17, including a new parallel taxiway. We're in the midst of transitioning that general aviation area from having no hangar space to having buildable pads. We now have, after this next summer, when we finish the road development, we'll have 9 pads available, pretty much utility served with a driveway and a taxi lane ready to build. And so I think those are all exciting things that we'll be talking about. We'll also give them some previews on the terminal projects that we have been beginning to discuss going forward. So a lot of information to share, and very excited about that opportunity to do that. Immediately after that meeting, the next morning I'll be leaving for Chicago to meet with United Airlines. This is our headquarters meeting that we've been trying to put together for a few months. We'll be discussing the future of that Chicago route, also potential for new routes. We would like to secure a letter of support from them for a SCASD grant. That would be critical. The grants are very competitive, and we really need to have a letter of support from an airline. So they're one of our chief targets as we look to the future of a new route, potentially a California route or a Texas route. And so we'll be talking to them about that. Also discussing the strength of the Denver market and how things are going there. So we haven't been to United. I bet it's been about 4 years since we've been down to headquarters or out to headquarters in Chicago there. So great opportunity to meet with them and also talk a little bit about the conference coming up. They've already told us they'll be attending. So a lot of topics to discuss. A really great opportunity to get in front of route planning leadership back there and talk about Great Falls. So another exciting happening coming up. On to the terminal refresh. You might have noticed when you came in today, the doors are done. We finished that up last week. The carpet's finished also, the carpet replacement in the doorways there. All the seating is in. I don't know if you've noticed it or not, but I think that looks terrific. And then we're working on the lighting. You probably saw the restaurant, the pre-security restaurant has been remodeled. And they've added kind of a shiplap type of wood in there with some light and dark tones. So we've picked a lighting fixture we think is going to work really well. It's one of the kind of the beams with the Edison bulbs wrapped around it. We're going to actually try to get 3 of those and kind of space them throughout that area. And I don't know, Rod, if you made any progress with the ceiling. That's the only thing we've got yet to do is figure out how we can mount something like that.
Yeah, we're just waiting for CTA. So.
Yeah, so we've got to get an architect's opinion on what we can hang from that ceiling because it is kind of an odd constructed ceiling. It's like a metal decking up there with some supports, and so we've got to find a mounting system that'll work for that. These fixtures are not all that heavy. The 2 contacts on each side of that beam, and each one carries about 40-45 pounds. So not a tremendous amount of weight. We just want to make sure we're doing things right because obviously it's pretty high up there. So we'll get that figured out and get our light ordered and hopefully have that up before summer. So that's exciting too. On to FedEx, discussions continue with FedEx on the future of their building. As you may recall, their lease will expire this summer. And so that's the 20-year financing that is expiring. So the origin of that building back when it was put together, that bond is actually retiring in the next 2 years. And so FedEx's lease is up and we need to get that relationship renegotiated. It seems as though they're mostly interested in purchasing the building, which I think would be great. We have endeavored to try to find a solution to provide them the lowest cost of building accommodation out there without overburdening us in terms of maintenance responsibility for that building. And I think that's a great opportunity for them to get that building at a very affordable cost going forward. And actually provide us with a little relief on the amount of maintenance activity we conduct over there. We'll continue to own the ramp. In any case, that is a public ramp. So there's a couple reasons for that. Should we get another airline in, let's just say Amazon Air decides they're going to start flying to Great Falls, we can use that ramp for multiple tenants. It also is federally eligible because it's not an exclusively leased ramp and it is available for everyone. And then the edge of that ramp, the edge closest to the terminal is actually a taxi lane. That's where the parallel taxi lane would go that goes all the way down to the other end, taxiway B, Bravo. That's where it would go, is on that ramp. So there's a lot of reasons there that we think retaining ownership of that asset makes sense. In the rent going forward, we'll have an allowance to replace the glycol collection system that's over there. We've talked that through with FedEx and said we need to continue to charge you some rent for that ramp because we're going to have to make some improvements over the next 10 to 20 years to get that glycol system replaced with something more like what we have at the terminal here, which is an open pond, evaporation pond, as opposed to a vaulted system. The problem with the vaulted system is they don't evaporate, which requires us to either dump that into the city or have that material removed. Dumping into the city is difficult because it doesn't comply with a lot of the BOD, bio-oxygen degradation statistics and pH statistics that they want to see on their lift stations. So we have to pre-treat it and get it to the right levels before we can release it. A few years ago, the city told us they really don't like us doing that. So we've been making other accommodations, and Going forward, we just need to update that system with something more modern. In addition, the trench drain is in the middle of the ramp. That oftentimes causes that trench drain to get a lot of pressure because that moisture is all coming to the middle where you have a joint there. Then all the wheel paths are over top of that pipe down there where you've got, usually 2 concrete walls on the sides and underneath, and that whole system tends to fail over time as the wheels move over it. In addition, the plows tend to hit the lips as you're trying to plow through that. And so we are seeing the normal degradation you would see in that system at 20 years, and it probably needs to be saw cut out and replaced over the next 10, 15, 20 years in that period. So we'll have some money in the lease to make those improvements if that's what they choose to do. But good discussions so far, and I really figure we'll probably have that wrapped up early in the new year and have good direction, come back to the board one more time to get the final approvals we'll need and get that lease extended out for the next 10, 20, 30 years. So exciting stuff there. Then Rod, do you want to give a construction update? A lot going on still with tank removal and other things.
Just this last week, we completed the tank removal of the 9 underground storage tanks we had over there. Bowman was operating those for years. They've since built their own system, so the tanks were empty. We had them removed last week, so that job's complete, except for we're waiting for soil sample results, so we'll see how those turn out. But the tanks are all gone, that's a good thing. The other project that's going on now is the runway information system, runway weather information system that we're installing in runway 1735 out there, and it'll give us a lot of information like surface temperatures, subsurface temperatures, ambient air temperature, and that'll help us to make decisions on plowing, snow plowing, if we're using chemical, if we should use it or not. A lot of different information coming off of that system, so that'll be good. See, what else are we working on here?
So we're doing mezzanine rack a little bit.
Yeah, the SRE building is getting the last piece of that done. The mezzanine rack, that's being built. Should be finished probably next week, I would say. Probably not going to get much done this week. And I think that's about the main things we're doing.
That's about all we've got left
Yeah.
out there now. And we are starting design, as the board approved the design of the roadway project for next year, and starting to get that underway, but that's a 2020 project. So that's pretty much all we've got right now. And then the last thing I have to report is I'd just like to recognize this is the last meeting of our fearless chairman, Chairman Hogan, and just from the staff perspective, I'd like to thank you for your support and helping us to continue to move the mission forward. And we've got a last formal meeting today, but we've got at the Christmas party something we'll present you with, and thank you for your service to the airport authority.
Well, it's been extremely enjoyable, and I appreciate all the support from the commissioners as well as staff. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think the advertisement hasn't been placed yet, or do we know?
I don't know if we did get a copy of it.
Yeah, we're running a little late this year. Typically, the city has that out in October. It'll be December next week. It hasn't yet been published, so hopefully we'll get that out there so we can find a new board member. If you know anyone interested.
It's on spell.
Yeah,
Sure.
And that's all I have.
All righty. So, first item is acceptance of the final 2018-19 audit. Would the audit committee like to speak?
Sure. The Finance Committee met, where did we meet?
Tuesday, the 19th.
And I went through the report with Anderson Zamelin, and we'll receive a unmodified opinion. And we had one finding pertaining to depreciation and adjustment that they had they had to make during their audit procedures. There's two levels of a finding, and one is a significant deficiency, which is what we received. The other is a material weakness, which is worse. So that the finding was isolated in their mind, and it didn't have anything to do with our overall internal controls with our financial statements. And so they made that adjustment. It was a prior period adjustment because it affected 2017, FY18 and 19. And the good thing is it wasn't a material weakness, because that has some adverse effects down the line. As far as right now, we're considered a low risk auditee as a governmental entity, which is and we'll retain that. So the Finance Committee reviewed that with the auditors and the staff, and we accepted the audit. So I guess we'll put that forward as a motion to accept the audit as an overall board. Is that the?
I think we can invite the auditor to offer any comments.
Oh,
yeah.
there she is.
Yeah, thank you guys. My name is Megan Connors, and I'm here representing Anderson-Zermühlen. Rick Reisig sends his apologies as he is presenting all afternoon today, so I'm sure he'd rather be here. But yes, thank you, Todd, for the summary. That was exactly what I had planned to state. We issued an unmodified or clean opinion on the audit this year. Everything entailed in our audit is ranging from the financial statements, PFC quarterly reports, regular compliance with laws and regulations, and then we also do a separate single audit on the AIP funds that are expended, as those are federal dollars that rise above a threshold that require a separate audit. And there was no non-compliance noted, and everything was a clean opinion, as far as the financial statements and the AIP funds go. Like he said, we did have one finding, and really the recommendation there is to look at getting depreciation maintenance software or outsourcing that function, just to prevent some human error that might have been occurred with that calculation this year. But other than that, Maria is absolutely fantastic for us to work with. I want to thank her for all of her hard work. There is a lot that goes on with these governmental audits, and there's always changes in accounting standards, and Maria does a very good job of trying to keep up with that, and does a really good job of getting us the information we need for the audit on a timely basis. So thank you, Maria. You make it very easy. So thank you.
Thank you.
Laura's going to get the copies of the audit. They didn't make it in here,
They've been emailed to them.
Oh, do you have them in email?
Just now.
Just now, okay. I was hoping to go through the MD&A a little bit, so do we want to table the motion and go through? I think we have another item on that agenda, and then we could maybe bring that back for comment after the reports come in.
That would be fine. So we shall table agenda item 1 and move on to airline incentive policy amendment.
Yes,
Number 2.
as the agenda item shows, back in 2014, the board adopted our second set of incentives, which are the current incentives that we have in place. The original incentives, I think we set up in 2011 and modified that a couple years later. And in reviewing our competitive stance as we are today, we've noticed that we think the market has moved a little deeper into the incentive world, and so we're recommending some improvements or some enhancements to the incentive program. I provided in the packet the 2014 incentive sheet that we give to the airlines, and then a modified 2019 incentive program. And the primary differences that you'll see in those two documents are, number one, we're extending those incentives out to a second year. We initially had a 1-year package where we would rebate the landing fees and the other fees that we had in there for 1 year. We're now recommending a 2-year program. And that's pretty much where the market is today, is a 2-year rebate in order to help those flights get on their feet and get through the first year or two with healthy performance, so that they can come back that third year. Generally speaking, once you have a flight in its third year, that flight's going to be in place for a while, barring any kind of changes in economic circumstances or oil price or anything like that. That third year tends to be a critical year in the airline deciding whether or not the market is going to work. In the old days, that would be kind of the year that they really expected it to make a profit for the first time. The first 2 years would be kind of a a loss leader to get that market in. The third year it should be profitable. Nowadays, I think the threshold is a little higher. The airlines really don't like any unprofitable route, and so having that route in place for the first 2 years and incentivizing it makes sense to help secure that route. And I'd really point to the Chicago route as a good example. That was a seasonal route. We were able to provide subsidies the first 3 years through the SCASD grant, and now the route is back on its own steam for the 2020 season. It's already out there for sale, and so we really think that it's important to extend that guarantee out to a second year. And then the other thing we've done too is we've liberalized the terminal rebate a little bit. We used to have something in there called a new market rebate, which was really targeted at if we got a new city or a new airline that's serving a new city, that we would rebate both terminal fees and landing fees. And what we're seeing now is, the continued consolidation of the airlines' hub network into fewer and fewer hubs is really making that new market incentive a little less appealing. For example, even just last year with the purchase of Virgin America by Alaska, San Francisco is now a multiple hubbing destination. Since we put this new market incentive in place, Seattle is now a multiple hub destination. You have both Alaska and Delta working in that market. And so as we see that consolidation, there's less markets that we can apply for new service to. And so even getting a second carrier to Denver or a second carrier to another market is very valuable to an air service market this size, because it inspires that competition that we want to see. And so we've kind of changed this to be a terminal rebate instead of a new market rebate, which just means if you're providing new service to the airport, we're going to rebate your terminal fees in addition to a landing fee. And that could be, if we had a new carrier come in, the terminal rebate would just be their proportionate share, their total share of the terminal. So for instance, when Frontier was here a few years ago, they paid what's known as a per turn fee. Every time the plane would come in, we would charge them $300 or whatever the fee was at the time. We would rebate that back to them at the end of the summer. In the case of a carrier like United, if they added a new California route, we would do a proportionate share. So if they have 5 flights a day and one's to California, we would do 20% of the monthly fee. We'd rebate back to them in a terminal rebate. And so those are the two mechanisms that we're kind of changing around a little bit to make the package a little more competitive with what we see other people doing. And we think it's a valuable change as we look ahead to 2021 as our next big opportunity to see new air service in our market.
All right. So the staff recommendation is to replace the February 14 Airline Incentive Program summary that was adopted by the board with the November 19 Airline Incentive Program. Commissioner Evans.
I'll make the motion to approve the updated program as submitted and described.
All right. Second. Commissioner Retz has seconded. Discussion.
John?
Yeah.
When you say it's, I can't remember which exact words were customary for the 2-year guarantees, is that in Montana or nationwide?
Pretty much nationwide. The larger airports are only incentivizing international routes. Like for instance, a Seattle isn't going to give you an incentive for a new flight to to Sacramento or something like that. They're interested in diversifying into international markets. But for airports our size, any new service is important, and we're seeing that with the Chicago route. I mean, in the slide deck that we'll be presenting to the city, if you look back over the last 5 years, United's market share has grown about 5%, and their average fare has come down, and that's a direct result of the new Chicago service. And so, any new route like that is important. And so you're seeing airports going to 2 years as a means of solidifying those routes. And the FAA provided some guidance, I think, about the time we adopted the 14 program. They kind of said the first 2 years are kind of fair game, maybe even a third year, but after that you shouldn't be incentivizing new routes. And so that, I think, provided kind of a goalpost that a lot of airports adopted, was that first 2 years of service as the incentive window.
Okay. So did they tell you when you say they provided that information, the FAA, does an airport have the ability to go longer than that? Just curious.
I think so. What they gave us is kind of a, I think they called it a guidebook. So it's not official policy. So I don't know if there's any airports that are really going longer than 3 years. But that was kind of, and typically when they kind of tell you, hey, you should cut things off at 3 years, they generally mean that, and I don't know if the FAA would follow up on that or not, but I would say in general, airports are not going longer than 3 years with those incentives. And the other kind of reason I think 3 years is kind of cap is that's what the SCASD program limits you to, is the first 3 years of the service. And so there again, it's kind of a regulatory mile marker that says kind of first 3 years are game for those incentives. But I would say the majority of the programs I see out there are 2 years of rebated fees. There are some other airports that have more tools than we have. For instance, Missoula actually does ground handling services as the airport. So like Delta Global Services out there, or SkyWest is maintaining the planes, they're cleaning them, they're stocking the magazines, they're loading the bags, overwing and underwing services. That's actually, the airport actually provides those services, and they offer those as a rebate, which is fairly valuable. So that's one thing Missoula kind of did to get a little better control. They didn't like the service that was being provided at the ticket counters and in the bag claim areas. It's been probably 5 years ago or more that they put that in place, and so they provided their own services. And I don't know how many of the airlines use them versus themselves. I'm sure Alaska probably does their own because that's kind of their policy. But Missoula certainly does some of them, and I know like American, for example, they do, and they were able to rebate that back too for the first 2 years. So you see different mechanisms to try and move that needle. We're a lot cheaper than the other airports in general. I think our landing fee this year is around $130, and I think Missoula's reporting $190. So there's also that factor too, where when you look at the longevity of the route, our economics a little cheaper on the long-term rate side.
And did I read it right that the incentive period changed from 12 weeks minimum down to 10 with the change in the minimum number of days of service? What's the rationale?
So the 10-week season is kind of what we've been seeing people do in Great Falls for the summer. And so when we get like Frontier, when they came in, was initially a 10-week season. Summer typically is a 12-week season, and that's kind of what the airlines kind of think of it as. But what we're seeing in Montana is those seasonal routes are kind of around a 10-week season. And so when Chicago came in the first year, it was a 10-week season. So that's the reason we dropped it down to 10 weeks, was to pick up, let's say, if an American wants to come into the market and they want to add Dallas, we certainly would want to incentivize that. And their best chance of being successful would be that 10 weeks of our summer, because the schools get out first, second week of June, and they're in before Labor Day. Like in Seattle, for example, that window is longer. So you typically think of a 12-week season, but that was the reason why we did that. And then we dropped the number of days per service because the planes are simply getting bigger. And so when you think about the, back when we put this in place initially in 2011, Frontier ran Q400s, for example. And so that's a great example. And then even when we had them in 14, they were running A319 as well. Now, if we get them at maybe an A320, and so the plane size is getting much bigger, and then the number of iterations are dropping. So Chicago, for example, started as a two-week service. So what we're saying is let's drop that down to more accurately reflect what the market for our new routes is.
Any thought to going to a 3-year?
I think it's certainly a possibility, and I think it's not a bad idea, particularly if we're successful in getting another SCASD grant. I don't think it would make a big splash in terms of the airline's decision to come. And certainly, what we've done in the past is when we've had an active route, like in the 14 timeframe. I think we adopted that in February. That was in direct relationship to an opportunity we had where the airline was saying, we like what you have, but can you change it this way to allow us to use it? And so, we factor that in as we're talking to the airlines about, what makes sense to them. And certainly this change that we're making, we did kind of market test that based on the opportunities we had and talking to our consultants who see across the field. And so, the 2-year was something they recommended. So yeah, I think we could certainly be more aggressive and go to 3 years. The other limiter that we've put on this is $100,000, which I think is that I really like having a dollar limit because we obviously, if for some reason we were really successful and got 2 or 3 services in, we don't want to run cash flow dry, while we try to incentivize growth. And so, limiting that to a dollar number and then coming back to the board and saying, hey, we've exhausted this and it's working is a better situation than the opposite. And so what I would say is, I think the 2 years is enough to really get our foot in the door. If the airline, if we get into that second year service, they say, wow, you could use another year, then I think we'd definitely come back to the board. Or if the consultants say, 2 years is good, but 3 years would help, we would bring that back too. And so, I think this is kind of where the market is right now. But if the board wants to be more aggressive, we've got that dollar limiter on there. So, I don't think it's a bad idea to go to the third year.
The big change between year 1 and year 2 on Chicago is going from the 3-a-week to the daily service.
Yep.
And determining if that was going to be profitable for them.
Yeah, they, and it's so interesting because they hire really smart people, and typically they have folks from good schools with great economics degrees, and having been around the industry for a long time, news service does things you don't expect. And so, I think they were kind of surprised with the evolution of that Chicago route because it didn't cannibalize Denver at all, but instead tapped them into a whole new clientele of people. And we can see over the years that we've had incentives since 2011, Delta's traffic has actually grown 5%, even though they've not received a single incentive, and very little of their schedule is different. The only real difference is 160-seat, 70-seat airplane a day instead of 2 75 seats a day. And so that's really the only change they've had, yet their traffic has grown. And so what that tells us is really that Chicago route brought brand new people to Great Falls, about 6,000 every summer, which for a town this size is a lot of people. And where we see those people coming from are markets we didn't expect, and I don't think we could have expected them. Philadelphia, the Ohios, all the Ohio big cities, the Carolinas, that's where we're seeing this growth, and it's primarily because we're seeing more competitive fares in those markets. And so, this is it used to be called the Southwest effect. I mean, Southwest could come in and grow a market 40% overnight by just dropping the fare. And it was well known in our industry that you could easily double. Albany was a great example. Southwest came in when that new terminal opened, and in the course of the year, they went from 1 million claimants a year to about 2.2 million a year. It was all Florida flying just because the rates were cheap. And so that's really what you see on a minor scale when a new market comes to a town like Great Falls is, the rates drop in these little micro markets that you weren't thinking about, like in Philadelphia. We know, like for instance, Charleston and Raleigh, both those airfares have come down 20, 30, 40% on average. And when that happens, the traffic just jumps. And so that's what ends up filling the plane is 2 people from Raleigh, 1 from Charleston, a couple from Ohio, a few from Philadelphia, and then Chicago native folks that, a lot of them are on frequent flyer miles they accumulated during the year, and they're taking their family on vacation to Montana. And so that's kind of the composition of these new flights. And so, it grows in ways you don't expect, and that's why, having those opportunities to have that incentive at multiple years allows that growth and really helping the airline to step into that route and make it a permanent feature like Chicago is in our market now.
All right. Any other questions, discussions? I have a motion, I have a second. All those in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, the motion to accept staff recommendation has passed.
Thank you very much.
Now, shall we go back to item 1?
Please, and we want to restate the motion to approve it so we can start some discussion. Hope you're all right.
So, our stenographer, can you read the motion?
I wasn't here. I'm assuming that, Todd, did you make the motion?
I'll make a motion that we accept the audit report as presented by Anderson Jamel and the draft report you guys received in the Finance Committee review and accepted.
All right. Thank you. That is the motion.
Thank you.
Has been restated.
If, I just thought we'd maybe cover just a few highlights on the MD&A report. The MD&A starts on page 4 in your packet, or in the audit packet there. Sorry that didn't get out earlier. But I was going to draw your attention to page 7. There's a nice summary there of operating expenses and revenues. And just a couple of things I point out there is, we finally crossed that $4 million in annual revenue mark. Looking back, not so long ago, even just 10 years ago, we're about $2.5 million. So we've grown revenue substantially over the last few years, and this is a record year. I think 4 out of the last 5 years were record revenue for us. So we continue to grow that top line, which is terrific. Expenses also grew this year. They outpaced revenue by a little bit, I think by just about 1%, and that's primarily as we've stepped into adding more LEOs into our staffing with the addition of a LEO last year, and then the continued growth in healthcare costs that many companies are experiencing. We're seeing that expense line grow a little bit. More often in the last 4 or 5 years, our revenues have outgrown expenses, but we knew we were adding a staff member this year, and so that's the primary reason you see a little bit of growth there. On the next page, on page 8, you see the breakdown of our revenues, and really, I think this is a great illustration of some of the strengths that we're seeing and that you're aware of in our revenue side. We're seeing parking revenues recover a little bit. We went down for a number of years there as the Canadians continued to suffer through that little stronger U.S. dollar. But last year we did see nearly 5% growth in that parking revenue, which is terrific. Oakwells took over in March, which was near the end of our fiscal year, but certainly they're seeing some growth in the food side of things, food and news gift, and we've seen a little bit of that in the last year. Rental cars continue to be strong. We continue to retain those highest of all time rental car revenue for the market. Our concession contract was rebid a couple years ago, and our revenue came down a little bit, but the overall revenue that's being generated by the rental cars in total continues to grow, and so we're beginning to see that through our contract there too. Landing fees were up a little bit last year. That's just a factor of the amount of projects we had in the landing fee. That it moves more or less as a cost recovery mechanism as we go along throughout the year. And then you'll see a pretty dramatic jump in the loading bridge. That's because last year Alaska transitioned into that regional jet from the Q400. The Q400 has a door height at about 4.4 inches above the ground, or 4.4 feet above the ground. It's one of the lowest doors in the industry. And in order to get a jet ramp to it, you violate almost all ADA compliant grades. So Alaska throughout the country has always had kind of a policy that they don't use those, even though in a lot of jurisdictions the jet bridge is considered equipment and not a structure. So in our example, we're not penalized for that extreme grade in Great Falls, but in Seattle they are. So throughout the system, Alaska has generally not allowed that plane to be boarded with a bridge. So as they transitioned into the new jet, they asked us, and frankly, I think almost all of the Montana airports where they've been ground loading for many years to transition to a loading bridge. I think we were one of the first to make that transition for them, and that did increase the amount of fees that they pay for that loading bridge. We had moved them to that gate during the 14 remodel explicitly so we didn't have to charge them a loading bridge fee because the old 1976 bridge didn't work any longer, or would work sporadically if we tried, but we were allowing them to ground load and not incur that fee. It was we had done that on purpose to try and keep their fees lower, but now that they're into that new plane, they had to make that transition, and so that's why you see the big jump there. And then on the land rent side, we're beginning to see some of these new leases coming into the portfolio at the end of last year. And you're all aware of those. We've leased out the lower shop, for example. That's one that's making its way into those rates. And then we should expect to see that continue to increase over the next year with the addition of the Loves and the Eagle Jet hangar coming into a full year of revenue in the current year we're in. And so I think those are great examples of growing the revenue line. As I said, operating expenses on the page 11 there, you can see came up a little bit, 3.9% increase in wages as we added that additional officer. Benefits continue to climb. We don't have a lot of control over that. In terms of the healthcare program that we participate in, we're able to buy those benefits through the city, certainly cheaper than we could likely provide those if it was just our pool. But like many employers, we do see some pressure on that. A little more marketing activity last year in the professional services contract as we continue to support that Chicago route last year, and its daily transition to daily traffic. That was in the last fiscal year that we were buying those ads. And then other operating expenses in there as we had some additional police training costs in the mix too. Materials were up. We had a really rough snow year. You may remember last spring towards the end of the fiscal year, and so we went through quite a bit of fuel and materials. But overall, I'm really excited about the year, finally breaking through that $4 million in revenue. And I think going forward, we're in a great position to continue to grow that revenue portfolio. So I think it was a terrific year, and I think we're excited about it and looking forward to good things next year.
Excellent.
Are we collecting full lease rent from Lowe's now?
Loves, yeah.
Loves, yeah.
Yes. So we, you may recall with the delay in getting that project to the annexation hearing, the Loves did approach us about rebating some of the rent. And so they were initially going to pay, I think, in March of last year. And we did, the board had granted me the ability to negotiate terms and conditions in that lease. So we did amend the rental agreement to change it to the beginning of this year. So they've started paying as of July, and they are paying now. And ideally, they'll be starting construction in the springtime. So yeah, they will be a full year revenue next in the current year.
And is Horizon using the loading bridge for the Q400 now?
Well, they continue to switch back and forth a little bit, but right now it's the ERJ. And I don't know, at the end of last year, were they using that for the Q, or were they ground
No,
loading?
they haven't. We'd need kind of a bridge adapter, which we don't have,
Yeah,
and
it
they don't
shows
have
up, the
that
Q400
either.
shows up once in a while.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's,
and they'll ground load when
yeah.
I think they had one in here last week, and
Yeah.
they just ground loaded.
And it's scheduled for about a month, I think, in February to come back. And so there was some discussion about that. They talked about trying to use the Q400 with a great transition. I think they've more or less decided not to. But yeah, slowly and eventually that plane will ease its way out of service here, and we'll be on the jet all the time. But we are primarily on the jet all the time now. So that is a great airplane. It's a really terrific transition for them.
No other questions?
Any questions? Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second. Although I think she already did. Oh, I will second.
Thank you, Commissioner
But I
Roth.
would have.
All right, any additional discussion on the audit? All righty, all those in favor of accepting the audit as presented, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Being heard, none?
Sorry to be a second on that, because I only had Timbo, you did. Okay, thank you.
Any other further discussion? Having heard no nay, the motion passes.
I will say thank you to our audit team.
Oh, yeah.
Probably should have mentioned that.
You know, I was a part of that team. It was a good excuse to keep some great coffee.
We've moved along since then.
That is true. I do apologize. I would like to thank the audit committee for their time and effort for that.
And then Steve.
Oh.
From.
Not them? Apparently you guys need a better chairman. Fortunately, that will happen next meeting with Commissioner Baki, as I will be retired. So I apologize, my dear. I apologize for calling you my dear. Now I'm flustered and don't know what to do. So I will ask for board comments. Commissioner Leon, Commissioner Timbo,
None.
Commissioner Retz, Mr. Smith,
Thank you for your service.
thank you. Commissioner Evans,
Took mine.
Commissioner Baki,
But I'll say it again, thanks for dedicating 3 years, 6 years?
6 years.
6 years to the board. That community service well received. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And it has been a very enjoyable 6 years and a growing opportunity for me. So, all righty. Do we have any comment from the public? We enjoy public comment. Okay.
I have one item, that in recognition for that service. We did
Excellent.
present you with the coveted lamplight.
Oh, thank you so much, sir. I appreciate this.
And we actually have that, they told me that we can get you a shorter stem, depending on what you prefer.
Ah, yes. I'll have to put it by on my bedside table.
Well, I think that goes on your office desk. They're gonna walk in and go, where did that?
Flashing blue light special.
Well, thank you very
Oh,
much.
that's awesome.
All right, with no further business to come before the board, I declare this meeting adjourned. All right, so, does anybody need 5 minutes before the next work session?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, so 5 minutes and you'll be back in 10. Typically, that-
Now.